Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Toward a Quality of Life. We're here in the month of November, the year 2004. Nice to be with you again. This evening I'm graced with the presence of a fellow psychologist, and I'll tell you who he is and we'll get started on our topic for this evening. His name is Dr. Harshbarger. He was a professor at the University of West Virginia for 7 years when he started out in his career. And then he spent 20 years in executive positions in corporations, also doing some consulting with them. And in general, his interest is in being an applied psychologist, according to principles of behavior research, mostly in industry and for organizations, business, etc. So he likes to take what he has found and reads about in research and apply it to true human situations and make for change in people and how they do what they do. He's presently the executive director of the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies, which is a group that is dedicated to ideas of behavioral psychology. Dr. Dwight Harshbarger, thank you very much for being here this evening.
Thank you for having me, Nancy. Nice to be here.
You're welcome. Let's start out with the idea of behavioral psychology itself. Of course, we have the word behaviorism, and then we have the nomer behavioral psychology, which aren't quite the same, but generally the roots of behavioral psychology come from behaviorism. And what is behaviorism all about in general?
In general, looking at behavior under controlled conditions, observing, measuring, understanding how a person or perhaps a laboratory animal, how they behave in response to changes in the immediate environment. And a behavioral scientist, or who's a behaviorist, will apply methods that allow him or her to systematically change parts of the environment, new stimuli, new prompts for the person or the laboratory animal, and then measure responses and how people, animals, respond to systematic changes in the environment. And what we're trying to look at, what a behavioral scientist in that framework is trying to look at, is what are the functional relationships between changes in the environment and the behavior that occurs as a result of those changes. We examine what we call contingent relationships, contingencies, or how a reward or reinforcer, we call it in our work, a positive stimulus might be applied specifically after or immediately after a specific behavior occurs and cause the rate of that behavior to go up. It's easy to see in a laboratory where animals are in controlled conditions, but you can see it in classrooms. We can see it with parents and children. What do we do that increases the frequency or rate of behavior among kids, or perhaps even with our pets in the backyard?
So you're dealing with isolated responses.
Well,
would that be fair to say? You pick out a response. You don't look at the whole person functioning. You look at
that's overstating it a bit. Let's say if we're trying to teach the child reading, we're going to focus on reading behavior. That doesn't mean you ignore the rest of the child. The child may need a meal, they may have medical problems, or there may be a variety of things happening.
Right, but when you're looking at whether you can improve the reading or whether it gets worse or whether it stays the same, you're isolating what you're looking at and you're manipulating the environment according to trying to make change one way or another. I have to say at the outset, as many persons know, I am not favorable to any research that uses animals. So I know that a lot of research is based on animals, but I'm opposed to anything like that. Yet behavioral and behavior psychology certainly was begun Well, not in the early stages, but along the way certainly was done using animals. However, behavior psychology is practiced and observed and applied with humans as well. So putting that one caveat in there from my point of view, we'll still talk about what behavior psychology has to offer. When you say you change environment, what kind of environment would you change, and what kind of a response would you be looking at, for example?
Well, let me keep it simple just
Okay.
for the discussion.
All right.
Even though I know you don't care for the laboratory animal, I'm going to use that
Okay.
example simply because it's commonly done and widespread. A laboratory rat might be in a small enclosed chamber. There's a bar that he can press, and he may have been trained to press that bar. And what we're looking at is a small light. We're trying to teach an animal to discriminate a light from dark. Light is on, light is off. Light is on, light is off. Light is on. If the animal presses the bar while the light is on, there's a reinforcer, a pellet of food. And over time, you can shape that response. That's what I mean by changing a stimulus in the environment. In a classroom, it's a little more complex. A child may be sitting in front of a CRT or a computer monitor looking at the presentation of syllables, sound, either sounds, hearing sounds, and or seeing certain combinations of letters appearing on the screen. The child responds. The audio may say, which of these two letters makes the sound ka, ka? And there are a series of letters or combinations of letters on the screen. And the child can move the cursor and select this one, that one, that one. And the audio would then say, right, you got it, good job, or silence, until the child makes the correct response. Over time, children can very quickly pick up, and you can use the technology to rapidly teach reading skills to kids. And that's an example of how a framed and specific stimulus might be used and varied systematically to build specific kinds of responses. And following with reinforcers or contingent reinforcers based on correct responses.
Are you saying that the voice then saying that it's correct is a reinforcer in this situation? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm saying that's for convenience. Yeah, that's right. There may be other things that can happen. For example, when the child makes the correct response, the screen may light up, or the child's favorite toy may appear on the screen. There are a variety of ways to do that. And one of the things that's important whenever you think about using reinforcers, or what we in everyday life call rewards, but reinforcers, is to think about the person on the receiving end. What's meaningful to him or her? It doesn't help for me to use a, hey, great job, audio signal to a child who doesn't care about that, or may not like me, may not like my voice.
Have you found that children may not like having an audio signal that says great job?
No, not really, but it could happen.
It could happen.
All I'm trying to say is you tailor, it's very important to tailor whatever reinforcer you're going to use to the person who's receiving it.
So you kind of have to fish around and find out what works.
Exactly. A common problem in business is to assume that if you give if an employee behaves in such and such a way, and you then give whatever you think is a good reward for that performance, some employees may walk away. Say, why do you do that? The selection of any kind of contingent reinforcer or reward is powerful. Or the process of selection is one that requires you examine the life of the person on the receiving end. What do they find meaningful?
What about the idea that a person would be gearing him or herself, if he were to follow behavioral techniques completely, would be gearing him or herself to consciously think always about what would be reinforcing, look for the reinforcer, versus just reacting, you know, sincerely positively when something nice happens, and trying to be, you know, more neutral and not too harsh when something not so nice happens, trying to be more understanding about it, but not being effusive because, you know, the right result didn't come out. What's the difference between, you know, someone just trying to be a decent human being and really caring about fellow human beings and expressing pleasure and approval when they do see something worthwhile in their opinion?
I think that's wonderful. I mean, I think that's what life is about. And that's what I hope I do that, and I'm sure you do. And I think good parents do that. Good teachers do that. I think what I'm trying to get at is a little more narrowly focused. That if my job is to teach reading, then I need to think about what resources I have at my disposal that I can use to help build that learning process. If I'm a manager of a workplace, and I think, what are my resources that I can use contingently, carefully, selectively, to build the behavior of my work team, my people who work in my group. I can walk around and make people feel good and say, hello, how are you? I care for you, and so on. I think we often run the risk of losing the positive qualities of that when we do too much of it. But I mean, one of the strengths of a book called The 1 Minute Manager was to get people thinking about how to use themselves as reinforcers in everyday business life.
For example?
For example, acknowledging performance when it occurs, walking around. The 1 Minute Manager literally means taking 1 minute to walk around through your work team, workplace, and acknowledge good performance. The abuse of the 1 Minute Manager is people read it. It's a very short book, easily read, quickly read, and the takeaway is, oh, I see. What I'm supposed to do is walk around my workplace and tell people, hey, good job, good to see you. That's a waste of time. In short order, it becomes very ineffective, and even worse, the manager who does it is losing his or her own significance in the lives of people who work for them.
You mean they then took too many minutes, or the minutes weren't well placed, or they weren't sincere, or?
It comes across as a manipulative attempt by a manager to make me feel good by smiling and patting me on the back, when in fact I know I just made a huge error in my work.
Oh, they weren't selective about what they approved.
Exactly.
I see.
Exactly. That's the abuse of the 1 minute manager.
So if you go around in a minute and you see nothing to approve of, you don't approve of it.
Exactly.
I see. But they approved anyway because it's been misread?
Exactly.
I see. Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about what on the job could benefit from a behavior approach.
Well, there are many things. I'll start with one that the Cambridge Center has been involved in for over a decade. It's called behavior-based safety and behavioral safety. Very, very commonly, people use engineering, ergonomics, and a variety of really powerfully driven, engineering-driven methods to improve the flow of materials, to reduce hazards, to put earplugs, protective lens, all sorts of things that we can engineer and improve the safety of the environment. There are other things where the engineering stops at some point and it becomes a question of human behavior. What is it that people must do in order to operate safely? If they're opening an electrical cabinet, they have to lock out or tag out, shut down power in that cabinet. Otherwise, there may be what we call loose energy, free energy, electricity, and it's a highly dangerous situation. So we have protocols to lock out, tag out. We may have the pinch zones, where if you enter that pinch zone, you risk literally losing a hand or even worse. So there are procedures for how you manage, how you behave when you're in that part of the environment. In a behavioral safety program, you look at a variety of jobs, all the jobs in a workplace. You define what are the safe behaviors when, for example, driving a forklift truck, driving a semi on the highway, picking up a carton, unpacking a carton. There are certain things that are correct to do when you pick up a box. Bend your knees, arms around. There's specific behaviors you can define. Then spend time observing, measuring frequency with which you see these things occurring, and then giving feedback to people. And it's amazing what can happen in a very short period of time. You can not only improve behavior that's correctly done and safely done in the workplace, but the rate of injury and the frequency of injury goes way down.
How do you improve what's already being safely done?
You want to maintain it. You don't improve it. I mean, if you're already operating 100%, you want to use reinforcers to acknowledge sound, habitually safe behavior. You want to maintain it.
And if it's not a reinforcer, it's really only feedback. You're giving instruction, you're giving suggestion, you're giving advice to someone.
Yeah.
It's kind of a feedback,
Right.
rather than a reinforcer, right? It's information.
Yeah, it's
that
information.
a body can use to
Right.
good effect.
Right.
And so it seems similar with the computer screen audio telling a child, good job, you got that one correct. That seems like a feedback, not necessarily a reinforcer. Although it's reinforcing to know you've done well in and of itself. That's kind of reinforcing. But it's also feedback. It's important to... Like if you hit a golf ball and it goes in the hole, then all the things that you've done with your body and your swing have been correct, presumably. And that seeing that ball go in the hole kind of reinforces everything, or is feedback for everything your body did to get that ball in the hole.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to have the connotation of like a reward, if you will, reinforcer, just more of a... information.
Yeah. From a behavioral point of view, and I would say a reinforcer, and keeping it simple, a reinforcer is any stimulus that increases the rate of response. So it may vary. What that stimulus is may change from child to child, from person to person.
And in
but anything that increases the rate, I'm sorry.
In these cases that we just mentioned, these examples, what are the stimuli? Stimulus, stimuli. What are the stimuli in these cases?
Well, with the child looking at the computer screen, making the correct choice, then there's a flashing symbol or a funny little thing happens on the screen, and the child may laugh and
is that the stimulus?
That's the reinforcer.
That's the reinforcer.
That then it is a stimulus. Yes, it is a form of a stimulus that's coming back at the child.
Right.
Right.
But, and what is there a stimulus before that reinforcer? It's like which came first,
well,
the
there's a
chicken
whole
or the
series.
egg?
There's a whole chain, a whole series of stimuli that come at a child. Yeah.
Now, what if you had a child who refused to sit at the computer and was brooding, and was saying no, no, and just didn't want to read, just didn't want to do anything? What would you do in that case?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Perhaps the child shouldn't be there. I mean,
well, where should it be?
It's
not there.
No.
I
mean, it's not my example. But if a child, teachers face these problems in classrooms. If there's a
to the teachers out there, they're saying, yes, they face them. Yes.
Let me use a different example.
Okay.
A child is 3 years old and sucks his thumb. He loves to watch cartoons. Loves cartoons. He'd do anything to watch cartoons. And when he watches cartoons, thumbs in mouth, and he's watching cartoons. Mom, being a good behavioral psychologist, figured this out. Here's what Mom did. And the kid sits down, 3-year-old sits down to watch TV, thumb in mouth. She turns off the TV. Thumb came out of the mouth, turned on TV. Watching thumb back in, TV goes off. Thumb comes out. It doesn't take long. It doesn't take long. And that child
what if that child
stops
starts getting very fussy, you know, because it's frustrated?
Yeah.
You know?
Okay. Here, this is hard. I'm going to say it, even though as a parent.
This is what we want to hear.
As a parent.
How old are your children?
My children are grown.
Did you raise them in a Skinner box? How old are your grandchildren?
I kept them locked in the closet.
Oh,
right?
okay.
Yeah.
People don't even know what a Skinner box is.
It's not worth it for now.
Okay.
I lost my train of thought. Where was I
Well, all right, so I said the child's frustrated. On, off, thumb in, out.
There's a procedure known in education, in clinical work with kids, very common procedure called timeout. In timeout, it means literally, timeout, stop, go stand over there. When I was in grade school, they used to call it stand in the corner. Today we call it timeout. It may take many forms, but basically the child is removed from the situation, removed from the fun, removed from all that's going on for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, not a long time, and then back in. The old put on the dunce cap, stand in the corner, used to be a way to get rid of a kid, get rid of them for a day or an hour or whatever. Today we're talking about the careful use of timeout. Selectively remove the child, bring the child back in. If the child then engages, reinforce the behavior, the right behavior as it occurs. If the child zones out again or becomes cantankerous again, time out again.
Oh boy, it's beginning to sound a little like a laboratory over there at the household. My goodness gracious. How about shaming the child, saying big boys don't suck their thumbs?
Well, I think from a behavioral point of view, yeah, I mean, sure, we can do that. The question is, does it work?
You would find that acceptable if it worked?
If I said to my son, big boys don't suck their thumbs, and he removed his thumb,
you would be okay with that?
I would then say, good, thanks. You got. It's one thing to say it and then get the behavior, because saying big boys don't suck your thumb, that's a prompt. The child then responds to the prompt. Then the next thing you want to do is to reinforce the child responding to the prompt. So it's one. If you say big boys don't suck their thumbs, child stops, and you walk away. I think you're putting what good just happened, you're putting at risk.
Well, because personally I don't think it would be wise to try to shame your child into stopping a behavior. Because, it's a lousy method to use. Shame is a lousy method, I would say.
I don't know.
You know what? That would be my thought on that.
Yeah.
But you know what my preferred mode would be if I had a thumb sucker? I would probably try saying, do you really have to suck your thumb? Do you realize you're sucking your thumb? Do you think you could try for a little while to not suck it? Well, let's see how long you could do that.
Good.
That kind of a thing.
Sure. And the child says yes.
If we have a good rapport.
Yeah.
If we're not already at
exactly.
different ends of the spectrum.
And if the child says, okay, Mom.
Well, I don't think they'll say, okay, Mom,
whatever.
but they might,
but the point is they say, they
whatever,
try.
They think about it, yeah.
Then I think
they might say, why? Or something like that. And you give them some reason,
Yeah. And they try it, and then you reinforce them for doing it. Acknowledge, praise.
And you say, well, I think it's wonderful. Do you realize that you didn't suck your thumb for 3 minutes? Isn't that great? And if they really love you, and you really love them, it might be a self-fulfilling situation, if you will. But we know that we're not in a general condition of good parent-child relations, where they're both on the same wavelength and talk smoothly and easily between each other. If you've watched the so-called dynamics these days. Not in all cases. In some cases it's unbelievable to see the synchrony between two parties, but a lot of times it's more how at odds the parent and child are with each other. Now what do you do about a child who pretty much is negative on anything the parent might ask, and comes with a sort of oppositional attitude.
That's very hard. I think in the abstract, I can't.
You always need something concrete.
But let me
yes.
Come at it. I saw a cartoon the other day. A couple of 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds in the supermarket. They're riding in the cart with the moms who stop to talk to each other, and the kids talk to each other. And one kid has a huge lollipop, and the other kid said, "How'd you get that lollipop? I want one." And the first child with the lollipop said, "Oh, it's very easy. You lie down on the floor, kick your legs, and scream and cry, and you'll get one." And so there's a game going on here. There's a game, a tug-of-war sometimes, more fun games other times. There's a game going on. I mean, kids have their own needs, and they're going to pursue those needs. Parents have, hopefully, a more mature pattern of behavior in mind for a child they want to teach, and those are at odds at times. And I think looking at the behavior of a child, if I want to change that behavior, the best thing I can do is to first figure out what's important to this kid. What is this kid like? Like the example a while ago of the child sucking thumb watching TV, turn TV off, and so on. Study the reinforcement, study what it is that makes a child tick. Figure out what a child likes. Then think as a parent, how can I use those contingently, carefully, selectively to get more constructive, thoughtful, helpful behavior from my child, to help my child grow, help my child learn. It is, to some, you can say, well, am I not manipulating the child? And sure, that's what parenthood's all about, helping the child grow. And if I was doing callous things to get a child to do my bidding, then that would be a kind of
What's an
negative
example of a
manipulation.
callous thing that you might do?
Oh, God. I haven't not done that.
You've never been callous?
Just
yeah.
kidding.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Good kid to do something I don't want to do, perhaps a chore or I don't know.
Mm-hmm. In other words, using the child.
Well, I don't even want to go down this road, but there are parents who use children. Children are exploited. They're exploited sexually. They're exploited for a variety of illicit and illegal and unethical ends. And that's negative and worst case manipulation, but I think of things like that when I think of
I see. So you're saying that you have to have at heart at all times the best interest of your child in mind.
Absolutely. And there come times when it becomes a question of whose interests are being served. For example, there was an article that appeared some time back in the Journal of Pediatrics, really disturbing. It found that 1-year-olds who watched, I think it was more than 2,100 hours of TV in a year, were far more likely to develop attention deficit disorder than kids who watched, say, 1,200 hours and so on. Kids who had high frequency of reading to them, or they hear words. Children who hear thousands of words in their first year of life tend to do far better in later years on any measure of intellectual performance than children who grow up not hearing words. Now, I don't think there's any magic in that. Children's brains are being shaped. Learning patterns are taking place. And as a parent, I have a lot of control over what's happening, particularly in that first and second year. If I make sure that a child is hearing a lot of words, I'm reading a lot of words, they're getting a positive and thoughtful stimulation, I can positively shape the future of that child.
Definitely, and this is what we would call, which is not quite behavioral psychology, but stimulus enrichment. There is a definite point to be made for, it can get excessive where parents overdo. You saw the movie with, what's the girl's name who starred with Woody Allen so much?
Diane Keaton.
Diane Keaton in a movie where she gets a baby. I forgot what it's called, but she gets a baby by mistake, by chance. And so she's in the competitive league with all the mothers in Manhattan, and they're already enrolling them in schools that are at high grades and where they'll go to college when they're mere infants in a competitive, getting them into the best schools. And then they go to classes where they stimulus enrich them for quite a long time, having them guess what a picture is or point to it or whatever, overdoing it. There's a lot of that going on too. I knew some psychologists who were doing this to their child, saying that the child was going to support them in future years and was going to be a brain surgeon.
Speaking of manipulation.
I kid you not. But we are talking about that. You can't just let the child, go on his own way, because the child doesn't know what's best for him. That's for sure. The child will get into trouble. The child will get into bad habits. And you can't also, it's not good to neglect the enrichment, because you can foster and facilitate a much more worldly and generally adept child by having input and feedback going on, and reading stories to them, and making the imagination work, and allowing them to do things that construct and manipulate on their own the environment to some effect, so that they get going with a purposeful kind of life. Had you a comment there?
Well, I very often, one of the problems that a busy parent faces with an active child is, I need to get things done, and the kid wants my attention, and there's a conflict between meeting the needs of the child and meeting my own needs. Those are terribly tough situations, and there's no easy answer to them. But just since we have an audience, I want to make an appeal to think long and hard about television as a babysitter, particularly with very young children. The next time you watch a commercial and count the number of camera shots during a 1 minute or even a 30-second commercial. What you're likely to see in most commercials is a new camera shot every second. Every second. A 30-second shot will have 30 camera changes. That's what the child is learning. That's what the world is giving a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old. Not surprising, that kid's going to want a lot of action. And when they don't get it, they're going to create it. And then we have an attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity, and related problems.
Well, I was going to say about TV and ADD that the speed at which the frames are shown and are changing actually condition attention deficit, because they condition the brain to be moving at a speed that is not manageable and correct for a regular human life as we are engineered as human beings. That's where ADD is getting so prevalent, is the TV. And when you as an adult are watching those images, even those sounds and those bold colors and those kinds of graphics that come at you and suck you in the eye and go to the brain, you are actually overloading your brain with stuff that cannot be parceled out in any meaningful way. It cannot be cohered. It's not even good for adults to get a steady diet of that kind of thing. It's not. We're not yet evolved like technology is evolved.
But it's an expedient solution when a parent faces a problem of how to manage a child. And I wish there was a way to say turn it off.
Well, what does a parent do who is working so many hours, takes the work home? What does a parent do? What's your suggestion? Not have children? Is that a good suggestion? To not just throw them in daycare and pick them up when you're so tired and you can't really relate and have the time to guide them and, give all the input that is required?
In the ideal world, reinforcing healthy self-play or private play, and if there's two siblings, then reinforcing them together, playing together in healthy ways. In the absence of that, a single child, teaching a kid, there are solitary games, there are a variety of things a child can do. that take some work, but they're a heck of a lot more adaptive and healthy than staring at a tube.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of very good cartoons on TV now for children that tell very good stories and don't move very fast. I don't know their names. There are a couple of quality ones, but we won't even, we don't have to add our voices to the lamentation about video games and what they're doing, and the speed at which they move and what kind of conditioning effect they're having on the kids. And this is all about conditioning. What Dr. Harshbarger is talking about is conditioning. And conditioning exists. You can't escape it. You can't escape your psychology. Every moment you're alive, as much as we know about ourselves and being alive, you are part of your psychology and conditioning. And conditioning is learning and having having things imprint themselves on you, including lack of stimulation and lack of enrichment and lack of focus and kind of an apathy and a boredom and a lack of being productive due to a deficit of being hooked into a human experience that has meaning and purpose. We have to have meaning and purpose.
That's true. There are other areas you can think about. For example, I used the example earlier of the kid with a lollipop. Look at the data on obesity today and what's happening in the way children are being taught to consume food, sweets, and it's another kind of escape. It's another way of giving a child a form of interactive stimulus, lollipop, candy, other foods.
Reinforcer.
That are very reinforcing and basically get the kid out of your hair. Mm-hmm. And it's reinforcing to the parent to get the reduction in demands from the child. Mm-hmm. It's reinforcing to the child to get the whatever it is, sweets or a sandwich or mm-hmm. whatever. But something negative is happening there. A child is heading down a road. The child is learning, just like the kid learns to watch cartoons, that that's what's good in life. That lollipop or similar kinds of foods become what's good in life. And those fundamental food patterns or preferences that are shaped very early in the early years become lifelong habits unless changed. And changing them becomes a huge problem. I have looked recently at statistics on obesity in America. It is incredibly frightening. If you look where we were even 10 years ago, where we are today, most states have up 20% or more of the population is obese. That's that's behavior that's basically uncontrolled and getting worse. And we're going to pay for this. I mean, you and I are going to pay the tax bill that has to 20 years from now.
You mean the illnesses that
follow? The illnesses, diabetes,
mm-hmm.
a whole variety
mm-hmm.
of weight-related
mm-hmm.
heart problems,
mm-hmm.
cardiovascular, lung, breathing,
mm-hmm.
all those things.
Or even food as a comfort, never mind the obesity factor, but food as a thing to do. Food as a displaced activity. Food as adjunctive behavior, to be behavioral about it. Food in place of what you really want or what you don't have, whatever the heck that is.
Yeah. So I'm saying use reinforcers carefully to shape the behavior you want. Study the child's preferences and use reinforcers that matter. Well, preference may be sweets and food and so on. Now you've got another set of problems, and that is to substitute more healthy reinforcers.
Yeah, look,
that's what life's about. I mean, it's not easy.
This whole idea of food as a reinforcer, that's an interesting one. Food as a reinforcer of any sort, that's an interesting one. Because if you don't give sweets, then you're just giving regular food, and you can't withhold regular food, which is absurd. You can't be using regular food as a reinforcer, which is where we get into the laboratory nature of this and this is not what certainly I would be intending to convey. Habits, though, the idea that we are like 95% habits, which I must say here, behavioral psychology is a facet of psychology, a big area of psychology that looks at the stimuli that precede a behavior, looks at the reinforcers that maintain or increase a behavior, looks at the punishers that suppress a behavior, and look at the environments that control behavior. Literally, from shape and sizes of room to which people are interacting with whom, to physical features to metaphysical features. And it's one big area of psychology underneath a huge umbrella of which there are many others, some of which we have also brought to you on this show in the past, dealing with the inner psyche, dealing with the brain and the mind and cognition or thinking and so forth. But in this case with behavioral psychology, and all these things are true at the same time, in dealing with behavioral psychology, we're talking about habits that you're not even aware of after a while. Most things that we have habits, like when I do this, I probably have a habit to do this. Then again, it might be in my genetic disposition to move this way rather than this way or whatever. But there are things I'm doing constantly I'm not even aware of that are habits. So like you could look at me as a whole big bunch of habit. And how do you work with your habits, realize your habits, and change your habits? How do you do that? How do you realize the habits that you have?
Well, you can record what it is you do different times during the day. I mean, or ask for help from a spouse or a friend or a family member. I mean, habits take all kinds of forms. Eating, dressing, working, you name it. I mean, if
what kind of habits are there in dressing, for example?
Putting which leg do you put in your trousers first? The odds are pretty good that whatever it was yesterday, you'll do the same thing tomorrow.
And guess what? When I tried to be ambidextrous in the last 4 years or so. So now I put my left leg into my trouser first, while I was right-legged my whole life. So I actually decided to change that habit for what I feel is an overall benefit to my mind.
I mean, the habits that we want to see shaped, the habits that we want to see developed in kids or ourselves earlier in life, have to do with sequences, chains of behavior, linking one, using a child wants to learn to throw a baseball. Pick up the baseball, hold it in your dominant hand, wrap the fingers a certain way, hold it a certain way, then bring power and force across your body with the ball, release it at a certain point. And if you watch Curt Schilling pitch for the Red Sox, you see that as one smooth, powerful move. And when you watch it in an 11-year-old kid trying to learn to pitch the ball, you see discrete, sometimes interrupted, sometimes awkward moves that over time get chained together. I mean, ideally, if someone said to Curt, tell me how you pitch, tell me how you go through what you do, I don't know, but I think he would say, I don't think about that. I see the batter, and I pick up the ball, and then we work out a code, and I pitch a certain kind of pitch. And I think that's what we want. We want in our own little parts of life, whether it's in reading or doing math for a kid, or whether it's being a good citizen and voting. I mean, it's habits that we want to develop that we don't even want to think about. We want to have them so finely and firmly and fluently developed, we don't even think about them. And that's the challenge a parent has, a teacher has, to build those chains and to build them over and 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 over, and the kid becomes fluent.
So what do you have to do from day one? Because you have to have a good communication to guide and build proper habits. You cannot be sort of a parent in absentia or a parent that's too busy working, preoccupied with one's work, preoccupied with matters of divorce and messy emotional traumas between parties and all that kind of thing.
That's true, but people are. I mean, that's life.
Yeah.
Those things happen. But in the time that you have with a child when you're working with a kid, and you're concerned about developing some particular kind of behavior, you're not just playing, laying around, rolling and wrestling and so on. I mean, you're interested in some particular kind of learning. I mean, be very clear about the characteristics of what it is the end product's going to look like. What is it you're trying to do?
Such as when a child is very, very young, what is the end product, for example?
Speaking a word, perhaps using saying the word dishes. Dish, getting the syllables and sounds correctly placed. The child may be saying wishes, and struggling with it. And through coaching, a parent can very specifically shape and help develop that or other sounds. I mean, that's just a simple example, but it's an important example. The sounds, we've all known children who, in the first 2 or 3 years, didn't get the sounds properly, and then at age 10 are candidates for remedial speech instruction and language learning.
Oh, is that a big part of remedial work?
Well, it can be.
It can be.
It doesn't have to be. It could be stuttering. It could be a variety of things.
No, but I didn't realize that a lot of poor speech ability at an advanced age was due to not hearing sounds.
It can be.
And
It can be. That's all. Yeah.
I see. So, really, a lot of time, really, and attention is required to watch over a child and guide a child and try to shape the pathway in which it is growing. I mean, you can't really leave it alone and expect miracles to happen, or kind of blame, the child and so on, or others for apparent deficits.
That's right. Well, miracles, I guess miracles do happen. Sometimes they're tragic, or miracles in the worst sense. I mean, the child is there, the parent is not attending to the kid. The kid's going to find
it's alive.
The kid's going to do things, and the environment, whether it's a television set or a computer or a curtain that falls when you pull this way, that environment's responding to the child, and the kid will pick that up. A kid will find some of those little things marking, oh, here's a crayon, and there's a white surface. Well, it happens to be a wall, a painted wall. That looks good, and that's an interactive relationship between the child, crayon, and wall. It's reinforcing to the child. The rate of behaving goes up until the parent comes in, and then it's punished and stops, at least temporarily.
Which gives an occasion for there to be bad feelings between the parent and child.
Then, day 2, same situation. Parent doesn't attend the child. Child picks up, today I won't use the green crayon, I'll use the red crayon. Back to the wall. Away we go. One of the problems with punishment is it does suppress behavior, but it does not teach an alternative. And so once the behavior is suppressed temporarily, then the stimulus that suppressed the behavior, parent punishing parent, is gone. Kid floats right back into the same behavior pattern. There's no new learning that's going on here.
And may resent you for it to boot.
Exactly.
We might have growing resentment.
Exactly.
Yeah, because what could be worse than getting punished in a milieu where there is no guidance going on to begin with, and then whatever the child is doing is getting punished. Like I've seen parents be very punitive sounding to their children when children wander off, and they're not holding their hands in busy places when they haven't got the cognitive capacity to watch out for themselves and not just drift. Yelling at them for not staying by their side when they're not old enough to be walking by the side and know how to do that. For example.
Right, yeah.
It's a hands-on job to be a parent. I'm not a parent. people will say, well, then you don't know and you ought to keep your mouth shut. Thank you very much. But it's a hell of a responsibility. And I think people maybe shouldn't have children if they're not, whether rich or poor or whatever, if they're not, you know, there to be with the child to a great degree and, you know, following the course of what the child is doing. Not because, and the thing is, too, from a different kind of psychological perspective, the more surety and certainty the child can feel by having someone in its life that cares and is older and can work things out and can lead the way and can help with problems and advise and get, you know, help the child out of jams and help protect the child, the more the child senses that, the more the child will explore and be curious and free and productive on its own, believe it or not. That's an entirely different principle, but sure. But that's the ironic way that it works.
I think you know, most parents don't have kids because they want to leave them alone. They have children because they think they will care for them and love them and enjoy seeing the child grow and mature. But there are conflicts. There are conflicts between my demands on me as a parent and demands that come from the child. And I can't do both, and if I don't do those make responses to the outside demands, we may not have money to put food on the table. So it becomes a very difficult set of choices. But there's another way to look at it, and it doesn't solve a problem, but it gives a different perspective on the problem, and that is, think about your job as a parent being the job of managing the learning of the child. Some of it you can do yourself. Some of it you can't. And when you can't, can you find an alternative? A substitute teacher, in quotes. Someone, maybe a relative, maybe a friend, maybe a sitter. There are a variety of choices. Probably the worst choices are the mechanized electronic alternatives. The best choices, and at the same time risky sometimes, are friends, family, sitters, who can, with your selection and guidance, step in and be helpful to that child. I mean, many parents send their children away to boarding schools. Very common in New England. These aren't bad parents. These are parents who are managing the learning of the child and selecting an environment where a child can get some good instruction and a healthy life.
Yeah, some of those stories don't turn out too pleasant, though.
No,
Children,
don't.
no,
Right.
because again, even with computer teaching, which you talked about before, we need to relate to each other. That's the human condition. We need to have, if we can at all, solid people that are in our lives that really do care about us and that we can feel that they care about us and know it for real. Yeah. That's our psychology as well. Well, we're coming to our end here, so I guess we will stop it here. I'd like to mention to you that if you have any further questions or curiosities about a behavioral approach to business, to managing your business, to working in business, to teaching your child, or to parenting, or any other causes you could use such an application for, you might want to check out Dr. Harshbarger's website. It's not his. He's the executive director. It's the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies, and so that website would be
www.behavior, behavior.org.
Okay, so
behavior.org.
Behavior.org, and you will see about his center and behavioral studies, which is located in Concord, is it?
We used to be in Cambridge, we're now in Concord. There's a section, by the way, for parents. You can write in, ask questions, and you will get a response on parenting questions.
Oh, you will get a response on parenting questions. Oh, you must try that. Behavior.org. You must try that.
If you have a question about parenting, send us a note, and an expert in the field of parenting will respond to your question.
Great. And I also answer questions at my website, I have to say, since you said that, NancyMroczek.com, just about anything in general as relates to psychology and behavior. So do check out behavior.org, and we shall see you another time, I guess, and think very seriously about being a parent. A child is a sinful thing to have go down the drain, and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So let's be way more considerate and involved in what we're bringing up in this world. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Harshbarger. You told us a lot of things. I'm sure you've piqued some persons' consciousnesses about these things.
Thanks.
So we will say good evening to you and see you again very soon.